In this presentation, you will learn about post-colonialism. Post-colonialism is a specifically postmodern intellectual discourse that consists of reactions to and analysis of the cultural legacy of colonialism and imperialism. It offers a counter narrative to the long tradition of European imperial narratives, considering political, economic, social, cultural, and psychological oppression. It aims to study the after effect of colonization on the language and culture of the people being colonized. What is colonialism and post colonialism? Colonialism is an extension of a nation's rule over territory beyond its borders. It is a population that is subjected to the political domination of another population. Post-colonialism is defined in anthropology as the relations between European nations and areas they colonized and once ruled. Post-colonialism comprises a set of theories found amongst history, anthropology, philosophy, linguistics, film, political science, architecture, human geography, sociology, Marxist theory, feminism, religious and theological studies, and literature. Post-colonial theory deals with the reading and writing of literature written in previously or currently colonized countries, or literature written in colonizing countries, which deals with colonization or colonized peoples. It embraces no single method or school. Goals of post-colonialism. The ultimate goal of post-colonialism is accounting for and combating the residual effects of colonialism on cultures. It is not simply concerned with salvaging past worlds, but learning how the world can move beyond this period together towards a place of mutual respect. Post-colonialist thinkers recognize that many of the assumptions which underlie the logic of colonialism are still active forces today. The key goal of post-colonial theorists is clearing space for multiple voices. This is especially true for those voices that have been previously silenced by dominant ideologies, subalterns. It is widely recognized within the discourse that this space must first be cleared within academia. Edward Said, in his book Orientalism, provides a clear picture of how the scholars who studied what used to be called the Orient, which was covered mostly as Asia, disregarded the views of those they actually studied, preferring instead to rely on the intellectual superiority of themselves and their peers. This attitude was forged by European imperialism. To the extent that Western scholars were aware of contemporary Orientals or Oriental movements of thought and culture, these were perceived either as silent shadows to be animated by the Orientalist, brought into reality by them, or as a kind of cultural and international proletariat useful for the Orientalists' grander interpretive activity. Some post-colonial theorists make the argument that studying both dominant knowledge sets and marginalized ones as binary opposites perpetuates their existence as homogeneous entities. Homi Bhabha feels the post-colonial world should valorize spaces of mixing, spaces where truth and authenticity move aside from ambiguity. This space of hybridity, he argues, offers the most profound challenge to colonialism. However, Bhabha ignores Spivak's stated usefulness of essentialism have been put forward. References made to essentialism's potential usefulness. An organized voice provides a more powerful challenge to dominant knowledge, whether in academia or active protests. Ultimately, however, post-colonialism is a hopeful discourse. The very post defines the discipline as one that looks forward to a world that has truly moved beyond all that colonialism entails together. Bembe finds it gives him hope in the advent of a universal brotherly community. Asking what it means to be human together, post-colonialism aims at decolonizing the future. Subject matters. The final hour of colonialism has struck, and millions of inhabitants of Africa, Asia, and Latin America rise to meet a new life and demand their unrestricted right to self determination. The critical nature of post colonial theory entails destabilizing Western ways of thinking, therefore, creating space for the subaltern or marginalized groups to speak and produce alternatives to dominant discourse. Often, the term post-colonialism is taken literally to mean the period of time after colonialism. This, however, is problematic because the once colonized world is full of contradictions, of half finished processes, of confusions, of hybridity and liminalities. In other words, it is important to accept the plural nature of the word post colonialism as it does not simply refer to the period after the colonial era. By some definitions, post colonialism can also be seen as a continuation of colonialism through different or new relationships concerning power and the control or production of knowledge. Due to these similarities, it is debated whether to hyphenate post colonialism as to symbolize that we have fully moved beyond colonialism. Postcolonialism, as a literary theory with a critical approach, deals with literature produced in countries that once were colonies of other countries, especially of the European colonial powers, Britain, France, and Spain. In some contexts, it includes countries still in colonial arrangements. It also deals with literature written by citizens of colonial countries that portrays colonized people as its subject matter. In Dutch literature, a specific colonial and post-colonial segment is named Indies after Dutch East Indies literature. A subsegment specifically focuses on post-colonial identity formation and culture of the diasporic Indo-Europeans, a Eurasian community originally from Indonesia. Its main author was Charlie Robinson. Colonized people, especially of the British Empire, attended British universities and, with their access to knowledge and education, created this new criticism. No, following the breakup of the Soviet Union during the late 20th century, its former republics became the subject of this study as well. Often, previously colonized places are homogenized in Western discourse under an umbrella label such as the Third World. Postcolonialism demonstrates the heterogeneity of colonized places by analyzing the uneven impact of Western colonialism on different places, peoples, and cultures. It is done by engaging with the variety of ways in which relations, practices, and representations of the past is reproduced and transformed, and studying the connections between the heart and margins of the empire. Moreover, postcolonialism recognizes that there was and still is resistance to the West. This resistance is practiced by many, including the subaltern, a group of marginalized and least powerful. Postcolonial theory provides a framework that destabilizes dominant discourses in the West, challenges inherent assumptions, and critiques the material and discursive legacies of colonialism. In order to challenge these assumptions and legacies of colonialism, post-colonial studies need to be grounded, which entails working with tangible identities, connections, and processes. Post-colonial theorist Edward Said's 1978 book Orientalism has been described as a seminal work in the field. Postcolonialism deals with cultural identity in colonized societies, the dilemmas of developing a national identity after colonial rule, the ways in which writers articulate and celebrate that identity, the ways in which the knowledge of the colonized people has been generated and used to serve the colonizers' interests, and the ways in which the colonizers' literature has justified colonialism via images of the colonized as a perpetually inferior people, society, and culture. These inward struggles of identity, history, and future possibilities often occur in the metropolis and, ironically, with the aid of post colonial structures of power such as universities. Not surprisingly, many contemporary post colonial writers reside in London, Paris, New York, and Madrid. The creation of binary opposition structures changed the way we view others. In the case of colonialism, the Oriental and the Westerner were distinguished as different from each other. This opposition justified the white man's burden, the colonizer's self perceived destiny to rule subordinate peoples. In contrast, postcolonialism seeks out areas of hybridity and transculturalization. This aspect is particularly relevant during processes of globalization. In postcolonial drama, theory, practice, politics, Helen Gilbert and Joanne Tompkins write the term postcolonialism, according to a too rigid etymology, is frequently misunderstood as a temporal concept, meaning the time after colonialism has ceased or the time following the politically determined Independence Day on which a country breaks away from its governance by another state. Not a naive teleological sequence which supersedes colonialism. Post colonialism is rather an engagement with and contestation of colonialism's discourses, power structures, and social hierarchies. A theory of postcolonialism must then respond to more than the merely chronological construction of post independence and to more than just the discursive experience of imperialism. Colonized peoples reply to the colonial legacy by writing back to the center when the indigenous peoples write their own histories and legacies using the colonizers' language, that is, English, French, Dutch, for their own purposes. Indigenous decolonization is the intellectual impact of post colonialist theory upon communities of indigenous peoples, thereby their generating post colonial literature. A single definitive definition of postcolonial theory is controversial. Writers have strongly criticized it as a concept embedded in identity politics. Postcolonial theory, as epistemology, ethics, and politics, addresses matters of identity, gender, race, racism, and ethnicity with the challenges of developing a post colonial national identity of how a colonized people's knowledge was used against them in service of the colonizers' interests and of how knowledge about the world is generated under specific relations between the powerful and the powerless, circulated repetitively, and finally legitimated in service to certain imperial interests. At the same time, post colonial theory encourages thought about the colonized's creative resistance to the colonizer and how that resistance complicates and gives texture to European imperial colonial projects, which utilized a range of strategies, including anti conquest narratives, to legitimize their dominance. Postcolonial writers object to the colonized depiction as hollow mimics of Europeans or as passive recipients of power. Consequent to Foucauldian argument, post-colonial scholars, that is, the subaltern studies collective, argue that anti-colonial resistance accompanies every deployment of power. Post-colonial literature is a body of literary writings that reacts to the discourse of colonization. In post-colonialism and related fields, subaltern refers to persons socially, politically, and geographically outside of the hegemonic power structure. The term derived from the work of the Marxist theory Antonio Gramsci entered postcolonial studies through the work of the Subaltern Studies Group, a collective of South Asian historians interested in exploring the role of non-elite actors in South Asian history. In the 1970s, the term began to be used as a reference to colonized people in the South Asian subcontinent. It provided a new perspective on the history of a colonized place from the perspective of the colonized rather than from the viewpoint of the colonizers. Marxist historians had already begun to view colonial history from the perspective of the proletariat, but this was sometimes seen as unsatisfying as it was still a Eurocentric way of viewing the globe. Subaltern studies began in the early 1980s as an intervention in South Asian historiography. While subaltern began as a model for the subcontinent, it quickly developed into a rigorous postcolonial critique. Subaltern is now regularly used as a term in history, anthropology, sociology, human geography, and literature. The term subaltern is used in postcolonial theory. The exact meaning of the term in current philosophical and critical usage is disputed. Some thinkers use it in a general sense to refer to marginalized groups and the lower classes, a person rendered without agency by his or her social status. Others, such as Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, use it in a more specific sense. She argues that subaltern is not just a classy word for oppressed, for other, for somebody who is not getting a piece of the pie. In post-colonial terms, everything that has limited or no access to the cultural imperialism is subaltern, a space of difference. Now, who would say that's just the oppressed? The working class is oppressed. It's not subaltern. Many people want to claim subalternity. They are the least interesting and the most dangerous. I mean, just by being a discriminated against minority on the university campus, they don't need the word subaltern. They should see what the mechanics of the discrimination are. They are within the hegemonic discourse, wanting a piece of the pie and not being allowed. So let them speak, use the hegemonic discourse. They should not call themselves subaltern. Subaltern was first used in a non-military sense by Marxist Antonio Gramsci. Some believe that he used the term as a synonym for proletariat, possibly as a code word in order to get his writings past prison censors, while others believe his usage to be broader and less clear-cut. In several essays, Homi Bhabha, a key thinker within post-colonial thought, emphasizes the importance of social power relations in his working definition of subaltern groups as oppressed minority groups whose presence was crucial to the self-definition of the majority group. Subaltern social groups were also in a position to subvert the authority of those who had hegemonic power. Thank you for watching the presentation. Do like, subscribe, share, and leave your comments about this presentation or any other topics you would like to learn more about.